I'm with Chris Darroll, who is the founder and executive director of the Small Business Place. Chris, I'd like to start with a figure, 77%. 77% of all private hiring in South Africa is done by companies with lower than 50 employees, small and medium enterprises. Now, arguably, this is 77% of a not very large pie at the moment, but it's an impressive figure nonetheless. What does it mean?
Well, it means that, Dan, that essentially the figures that you're quoting come from the Treasury's annual budget review this year. And they estimate 77% of all private hiring in this country comes from those companies employing less than 50. But more importantly, too, those companies also contribute upwards of 50% to our GDP. And there's a very narrow band of these companies in terms of numbers. They estimate between 250 to 600,000 companies exist in that bracket. So what does it mean to us? It means that when we talk about enterprise development, we have to start thinking about where we can add value to those firms that have the potential to grow, and of course, in growing, be able to, in inverted commas, hopefully employ more people, because that's where, as we know, the hiring is taking place.
Sure. Say 20 years down the line, South Africa has seen 15 years of plus 6% GDP growth. We're in a better place. What is the role of small and medium enterprises at that stage?
Well, I think that the majority of our economy is built around small and medium enterprises that are adding value to our economy in that context. So I would like to see 20 years down the track, and hopefully with 6% growth, an explosion of innovative, outward-looking, local, small and medium enterprises, employing lots of really new people and young people.
And for that we need capital, obviously seed capital, but equally as important, social capital. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting concept which, you know, most people haven't sort of really focused on, but the importance of social capital in growing enterprises, or even for that matter in terms of community development, is crucially important, because it's the area where companies network. It's the whole context around sharing and learning at a peer level, and making sure that your enterprises are built around the networks that you create. And what's interesting, there's been some recent research I know done by Wits School of Economics, which is talking about young people entering the job market. And I think they've come up with the idea that essentially young people can't access the job market because, inverted commas, most companies don't employ directly. They generally employ via networks. Right. So how can you get into that? So
in the first instance,
yeah.
Right.
So social capital or networking and those kind of issues is a crucially important aspect, and I think that's an area where corporate social investment initiatives could play quite a significant role.
Is that a focus of the ED programs that we've seen over the last decade, or is there a shift towards it?
I don't know if there's a shift towards it. I do know that most of the company social initiatives seem to be predominantly around entrepreneurial training. So maybe in expanding that.
Why do you use the irony quotes for entrepreneurial?
Sorry, it's one thing I go banging on about. But, you know, folk seem to think that entrepreneurial training is around training people to start up their businesses, because they view that as, inverted commas, entrepreneurial. Right. But generally startups are not entrepreneurial in nature, and they generally stay informal because deliberately, and generally they fail. So entrepreneurial training is much broader than that, and it starts at a very early age, and it's a cultural issue.
We have seen some successful and replicable models fostering economic growth amongst SMEs, but do you feel that the rural development is a side that's getting ignored through this?
Well, rural development is a tough nut to crack, because in a sense, when you're talking about enterprise development, you need markets, and generally rural communities are very distant from markets. So a rural enterprise itself is pretty difficult. But we've had some success with that. We started an initiative called the Rural Enterprise Development Initiative, but it was more around focusing on the local champions within the community and how the community could build the economic activity through collective effort, and obviously being championed by a person who we trained to start to think about different ways of looking at things. And yes, and some of the enterprises that came out of Ready were very successful and grew. beekeeping activities, for example. One or two of them actually ended up doing contracts with the big commercial farmers in terms of pollinating crops and so forth. So
fantastic.
Yeah, but difficult to crack.
Chris, thank you very much. Chris Darroll, Executive Director of the Small Business Place.